Please welcome Pastor Jim Garlow.
Hi, Tony. Good to be with you at I Pledge Sunday. Let me tell you where we are in our nation right now. It's very simple. If I would have said 10 years ago marriage is between a man and a woman, you say, well, of course it is. Say that today, Pastor, you're being too political. If I would have said 30 years ago that the practice of homosexuality is not acceptable before God, that is a sin, people said, well, of course it is. Say that today. Oh, Pastor, you're being too political. If I would have said 40 years ago that abortion is wrong, that tearing up a baby in the womb is a bad thing, people would have said, well, of course it is. Say that today, and people will say, oh, Pastor, you're being too political. What we used to call biblical and moral issues is now political. And so pastors aren't supposed to speak out on that anymore. What has happened is we have allowed a moral equivalency to develop between right and left. It's not right versus left. It's right versus wrong. Let me ask you this. Where's the moral compass in America? It should be the pulpit. It should be the pastors. In other words, the pulpit has been largely quiet on this. The reason we have the problem we have in Washington, D.C. is not merely because of the wayward nature of our Congress. It's because the pulpits of America are not instructing them how they should think with the Word of God. Nor are the pulpits in America adequately instructing people on how the Bible applies to national life to the voting electorate that goes out and selects the 539. Let me ask you a question. How did we get in the mess we're in? I want to talk to you about one day that changed America, July the 2nd, 1954. And what we're dealing with these days, whether it be the issue of abortion or redefinition of marriage or drowning in debt, all these things stem from what happened July the 2nd, 1954. Lyndon B. Johnson, he was then a senator, was returning from Texas. He'd been in a tough election. He was angry at two prominent businessmen in Texas. They opposed him through secular, not-for-profit corporations. So when Lyndon B. Johnson got back to Washington, D.C., the IRS was in the process of overhauling the tax code. A bill was going through the Senate, and he stepped up and submitted what is now called the Johnson Amendment. The result was a speech restriction on any 501c3. The chief legislative aide of Lyndon B. Johnson said, we did not have churches in mind, had no idea it would impact them like this. From that point on, it became effectively illegal for a pastor to speak out in certain ways on the issue of elections. And pulpits went largely silent on biblical application to national issues. For 58 years, there's been attempts to challenge the Johnson Amendment, but it hasn't happened. So consequently, the Alliance Defense Fund, now called the Alliance Defending Freedom, all 2,200 allied attorneys are standing behind us as pastors if we will intentionally defy that Johnson Amendment and speak out politically on issues from the pulpit. No governmental intrusion in the pulpit based on the First Amendment. 33 pastors started that back in 2008, recorded their sermons, and mailed them in the IRS. And each year there's been more and more. Over 500 pastors participated last year. This year, join with 1,000 pastors across America by going to pulpitfreedom.org and sign up now. We will not see the spiritual awakening we all long for until the pulpit is unfettered and unmuzzled. Join us at pulpitfreedom.org, October the 7th this year.